Hey guys, Dr. Justin Marcagiani here. Today is going to be a great podcast. I have Rob Edwards from Heritage Health on the podcast today. We'll put Rob's links down below here. And Rob's actually a good friend from back in college. So he goes way back. He's a nutritionist now, works with patients and families all over the country. So we'll put Rob's info down below. But today we're going to be chatting about maximizing focus, getting to the root cause of ADD or ADHD, right? Your inability to control behavior, inability to focus, concentrate. Maybe there's a little bit of anxiety and mood issues along with it. We're going to be talking about getting to the root underlying cause because conventional medicine's approach with it really is just throwing stimulants at the problem, not really getting to the underlying issue, throwing things like Adderall or Ritalin or just kind of like basically methylphenidate type of methamphetamines, if you will. These are stimulants, right? They're going to whip the adrenals, they're going to whip adrenaline, and it's going to allow you to focus better, but that's not really getting to the root underlying issue. And the more you stimulate the brain, you're actually burning up your neurotransmitters. You're essentially robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're whipping a tired horse to get better performance in the short run, but you're sacrificing neurotransmitter health in the long run. It's like someone not sleeping, eating poorly, and trying to just overly drink coffee every hour to keep their attention up. Maybe for studying for a final, it can work acutely, but long term, it's not. So excited to dive into this topic today. Rob, how are we doing, man?
Yeah, good. I'm excited to be on here. This is my number one podcast. We were talking before. The last podcast I did, I was in the executive search, and it was the CEO for Dunkin' Donut brands, and that was an interesting conversation. But switching up and getting into functional medicine has been a huge change for me, and so I appreciate your mentorship and everything else that you've been able to help me out with. So I'm excited to be a part of this journey, but more importantly, excited to help people on their journey. And today excited to talk about this ADHD, and I think it's something that a lot of people initially associate that with children, but most adults would say, "Hey, I have the same kind of symptomology that I'm seeing in my own life." And I think there's a couple of different factors that can play into that. Not just maybe mainstream ideas, but even things like cell phone, scrolling on Facebook, the neural patterns that change inside of your brain. Uh, when we're doing those kind of things, especially late at night, um, and things like that. So, what do you think about
So out of the gate, you have things that are overstimulating the brain, right? So if we look at like downstream symptoms, right? ADD, inability to focus. Let's
that?
say
Right.
your kids too, young kids, inability to focus, especially with boys. They may be put into a classroom environment where they don't have um,
Yeah.
the brain development to focus yet. So maybe the expectations on boys may be a little bit too high. Maybe we're kind of holding younger boys to the same expectation of a girl at that same age. Girls tend to have a better ability to focus at that similar age when they're young, let's say below 10, below 9 or so. And boys develop that ability to focus as they get older. And I'm singling out boys because boys tend to be the ones that get thrown a lot of the ADHD medication, ADD medication
Yeah.
early on. This is going to be the Ritalin, the methylphenidate, the methamphetamine medications to overstimulate the brain. And again, we don't want to overstimulate the brain, especially when it's in that sensitive area of brain development. And also, a lot of times kids have underlying driving factors that are contributing to that even more. We'll go into that. So, if
Mhm.
we have downstream symptoms of inability to focus, what are some of the simple things that people are doing that is causing these symptoms downstream? So, I
Mhm.
would just say the first thing out of the gate is not having good, healthy proteins and fats at each meal. I think is good starting point because proteins and fats, one, the fats are going to have that raw material building block for all your cell membranes. Number two, it's going to provide the cholesterol, usually within the high quality fat, is going to be a building block for the brain and the neurological tissue and the myelin, which is important for those nerves to be able to conduct. Think of it as like putting wiring in your house. Well, if the wiring's frayed or rusty, it may not conduct signal. Well, same thing. If you don't have good, healthy myelination in your nervous system, that's going to impact conduction. If you don't have the proteins are also going to be the building block for almost all of your amino acids, which is what conducts that nerve signal from pre to postsynaptic neuron. You have this pre-synaptic neuron, the
Mhm.
postsynaptic neuron. You have this little middle part called the presynaptic cleft, and you need neurotransmitters to help conduct that signal, whether it's serotonin, dopamine, adrenaline. And so your neurotransmitters come from protein. So the first foundational thing I look at when anyone has attention issues, especially kids, is are we having good, healthy proteins and fats to work on the building blocks of the neurological tissue and the building blocks of the neurotransmitters?
Right. Well, I think a part of that too is just taking an honest assessment in terms of like what are your kids eating in the morning? Like what do they wake up? What's the first thing that they're intaking? Are they getting enough water? Are they getting enough nutrients just from their food? I think, the standard American diet, of course, is just we're always run, 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 and nobody's eating, omega 3 fatty acids. We're not getting that through our eggs. We're not getting that through the meals that would help us to get these nutrients or the raw materials that we need for our body to grow. And I think we sort of take that for granted that our body needs these nutrients. They're essential. They're not sort of optional. And we tend to go towards what we like, or like, especially if we have children, we tend to go towards what will make them stop arguing,
Yep.
right? Like what will make them stop like throwing a fit. And so we're like, well, we know what we need to do, but it's difficult to do. Um,
Yep. There's a behavioral component with this. And part of it as a parent is you have to look at it and say, I need to give my kid what they need, not what they want. Especially if your kid's getting exposure to any TV or commercials, your kids are going to be primed to want all the junk food. Now, my kids
Absolutely.
literally have zero experience watching commercials at all. And
Yeah.
so it's funny, like we go into a store every now and then, like walk through Costco or Whole Foods. There's not any priming to want to reach for this or that junk food. And so
Right.
keeping your kids away from the tech as much as you can, obviously age dependent, and the social media is going to help allow you as a parent to give your kid what they need. Because if you're trying to give them what they need and they have all this marketing propaganda saying, I need to have these things or this junk food, then it becomes a
Mhm.
little bit harder as a parent. So you really have to, set the foundation, set the boundaries with your kids. This is what we're going to eat. Mom and dad are going
Mhm.
to eat it. We're going to model it to you. This is why we eat it. And you try to provide an environment where the other crap isn't there in the house. Or if there is some treats and stuff, you try to provide the healthier versions of that. Think, the Unreal high quality dark chocolate coconut or the Chalk XO keto chocolates. We try to have things like that are low
Yep.
sugar, good healthy fat. So if we're going to eat fat, there's still some blood sugar stabilizing impact there. There's still very low carbohydrate. Maybe it's a little bit of stevia. Maybe it's a little bit of natural low sugar stuff. And we
Mhm.
would just time it up after a meal. But starting out of the gates, breakfast is so important because that sets the table for blood sugar. That sets the table for cravings. That provides the building block anti-inflammatory fat, like the omega-3s, like you mentioned, especially if it's grass-fed, pasture-fed type of chickens. The
Yep.
omega-3 in those eggs is going to be much higher. That's going to set the brain for really good focus, because the more the brain inflammation is down, the more you're able to focus. The more brain inflammation is high, you activate microglial cells in the brain. So the immune cells in the brain are higher when there's more inflammation. And the microglial cells will cause more brain fog when the brain's inflamed. And so your ability to focus when you have brain inflammation, that microglial, those immune cells in the brain are activated to much higher in regards to your inability to focus. And so if we can set the table with a solid anti-inflammatory proteins and fats, that allows the brain to be in a much better starting point, keeps the cravings down. So now your kids are in a place to make better decisions throughout the day if they're not in the house in regards to what foods they're going to eat.
Yeah, well, and then it's also a little bit of a cycle too, right? Because it's like you're 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 eating in the morning. If you have ADHD, you're likely stressed, right? So your children are like high levels of stress. That correlates back with the hormones and cortisol. And when your cortisol is up high, it's also going to suppress your gut function, and
Mm-hmm.
it's going to suppress your immune function. It's going to suppress other hormonal production. And so it's one of those deals where it's like a chicken or the egg. Which do we do first? But dealing with the food, I think, especially in kids, is easier up front out of the gates to deal with, and getting through that resistance phase, which I think, to your point, you were saying, explain to them why. You do have to educate your kids. If you're not educating your kids, it's going to be very difficult to just say, hey, eat this because I told you to, right? It's like, how well does that work for us? And but if we explain why and we make it easy for them to understand, and we're saying, hey, we're doing it with you, we're doing this together, I think that goes a long way, because will that cause a stress response at the beginning? It's going to cause a little bit of that, but from what I've experienced having 5 kids, is eventually they get over it and they say, okay, I need to eat an apple because apparently that's all we have left in the house to eat. And sometimes that's the name of the game, right? Is you don't have it in the house.
Yeah, and there's two issues, right? You start out before you even have kids, or when the kids are super young, it's all they know. And then it's just easy. You build those patterns and you just move and you just go. Or if let's say you got this information a few years after having kids and they have some bad habits, then you got
Hmm.
to just rip that band aid off. Rip it off. But the key is
Yeah.
modeling, 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 showing them that you're not, that you're subject to the rules as well.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a couple about some other key nutrients that are going to be important as well. So out of the gate, I always like to make sure my kids are hydrated as soon as they get up. Right, water is very important. Hydration is really important. Most of the fluids in your body are going to be water based, so good, high quality, clean, filtered water. If it's reverse osmosis, we're adding some electrolytes or minerals to that water. Again, RO water is good because you're going to at least have all the microplastics, toxins, pesticides, those kind of things out. So RO is great. You just have to be careful because now it's very devoid of minerals. So having a really good high quality Redmond's Real Salt or a trace mineral supplement that we can put a little bit back into that water and remineralize is great. Or if you have a little mineral water, like I'll have some of these Topo Chicos or Gerald Steiners or Mountain Valley, and we'll do some of that sometimes just to ensure the water electrolyte concentration is very rich. And so we'll start off with hydration, start off with electrolytes, because your nervous system needs that sodium potassium pump to work properly. So if we don't have good quality electrolytes, the nervous system's ability to communicate. So we talked about the myelin, that's kind of the structural integrity. But at a cellular level, at a cell membrane level, we need the fats and we need good quality electrolytes and hydration. So that sets the table right there out of the gate.
Yeah, it comes back down to the macronutrients, that you're getting your proteins, your fats, your carbohydrates. And I think part of that as well is, and I've noticed this thing in particular, like with my sister is, she's thinking carbohydrates means, a tortilla or something like that. That's not what we're talking about. When we're talking about carbohydrates, we're talking about whole food, nutrient dense carbohydrate options. And I think a lot of people get confused with that and still go to the highly processed foods that are out there that has all kinds of chemicals and preservatives and other things like that create other issues down the road for them.
Yep, exactly. Like with my kids, we started them off today. They had 1 to 2 eggs, pasture fed eggs, cooked in ghee, some sea salt on it, cut up an apple, handful of berries. And so, if your kids are at a pretty good weight, kids are pretty active. As long as your kid doesn't have a metabolic issue or they're not already very overweight, keep your carbs to like an apple, some berries, those kind of things are fine. If your kids are going to be doing a lot more energized, doing a lot more activity, you could throw in a little bit of a safe starch, squash, sweet potatoes, some hash browns, or even a half to a quarter of a green banana could be okay. You got to look at where your kids are at metabolically. My kids, good proteins, good fats, and a little bit of high quality fruit to start the day. Good potassium, good vitamin C. Now, supplement wise, I really want to keep glutamate down. So glutamate is kind of an excitatory neurotransmitter, and we want to be able to calm that down. So the big tools that I have in my toolbox metabolically to calm that down are going to be cysteine or N-acetylcysteine. We'll utilize that. I mean, you'll see high levels of glutamate in a lot of OCD type of people, that obsessive compulsive anxiety. So that glutamate can be suppressed with good healthy proteins and fats. Now, supplementally, we're going to use cysteine. That's shown to modulate glutamate significantly. There's been different studies looking at trichotillomania of kids that were just picking at their skin or literally ripping their hair out and eating it, and they saw significant improvements with cysteine. So cysteine is very powerful at calming down glutamate. I also like theanine. Theanine, GABA, or just GABA by itself, but theanine is an important building block to kind of really getting that GABA upregulated in the brain. And GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. Think of inhibition as it's going to be the brake on the nervous system. So if that nervous system's already in overdrive and they're already very overstimulated, well, much better off to calm things down and utilize GABA than say, okay, we're already stimulated. Let's overstimulate you to the point where now you come back down. Now, instead of overstimulating, we're trying to just hit the brakes and bring you back down. So it's a different mindset than what conventional medicine does. They overstimulate to the point of creating focus, because you go so high, it actually creates focus. But we actually want to do the opposite. We want to actually bring it back down with GABA. We could even do things like lemon balm. We could even do things like valerian, but some of those can be a little too sedating. So I like to keep it simple. I'm going to use theanine. I'm going to use cysteine. I'm going to use some magnesium. These are going to be some really good nutrients that we can add in supplementally.
Yeah, magnesium having the calming effect on the brain. And then we also have like vitamin D, which, some literature out there says about 78.4% of children with that are deficient in vitamin D. And then we have iron deficiencies, anemia that's associated with that. Of course, we talked about omega-3s. And then zinc in terms of regulating the nervous.
I think vitamin D out of the gate, just to highlight vitamin D. I mean, I think if you're
exactly.
low in vitamin D, that's going to impact your immune system, right?
Yep.
And so much of what's going on in the brain is immune driven, right? If a lot of people, are set up with this kind of subclinical autoimmune issue, I think, because if you look at autoimmune disease in general, it's on the rise in today's society and culture. And so anything you can do to modulate the immune system puts you into a place of keeping that autoimmune issue from expressing. And we know these conditions are probably starting when kids are young and then taking full effect as they get into their 20s and 30s. So vitamin D, I think, is an important break that we can put on that autoimmune condition from progressing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, little things in terms of like, even grounding, which sort of gives us our attention back,
Hmm.
right? We can go outside and we can stand and just notice things, just notice the world, notice the trees, notice the sky, you know, paying attention. You're sort of just training yourself to do that. I think that's part of it as well that maybe doesn't get talked about enough is that we really can't hold our attention for that long. Even if you look at all the marketing strategies that are out there nowadays, it's like it's attention grabbing, right? And so it's creating issues even in that. So being able to slow down, go outside in the morning, like take your kids out there and just like do some grounding techniques,
Yep.
and it goes really far. I think there's a lot of
Also,
improvement that can be made.
go ahead. Yes, go ahead. Any more
No,
on
no,
that?
go ahead. Just saying that I think there's a lot of improvement there, and that's a simple thing to do.
And also get some first morning sun, 7:30, 8 o'clock, your
Yeah.
kids are up. If it's cold out, open up a window or open up a screen and have them sit in front of that window for 5, 10 minutes if you can. Or just try to find a place where they can eat their breakfast, get some sunlight on their skin. Even if it's that low morning light, the UVB is very low, but that's going to
Mhm.
be very helpful for resetting their circadian rhythm. So if their sleep or general wake and sleep cycles off, that can be very powerful at resetting things. And
Yep.
then we kind of already talked about it implicitly, but I haven't said it specifically. Cutting out the processed sugar is an important thing. So when
Yeah.
you
Totally.
consume too much sugar, what's happening is you're flooding dopamine and serotonin into the brain, into
Mhm.
those synapses, into the presynaptic neuron, postsynaptic neuron. You're flooding it in between those synapses. And when you do that, you get this big bump, right? Well, guess what also does that? Stimulants do that.
Mhm.
It, Ritalin, Adderall, these methylphenidate type of compounds, these methamphetamines, they're over flooding the system with serotonin and dopamine. You get that with sugar, right? And the problem is when you do that, you get this big increase, but then the problem is the blood sugar drops because your body makes insulin, pulls it into the cell. So you have this big increase, and then you have this
Mhm.
crash and this letdown where you
Yep.
feel crummy, your focus is even more poor. Now you're tired again, and then guess what you do? You reach for
Yep.
that other bit of sugar at lunch, bring you back up. Maybe you want a juice for snack, and you just keep on going on this roller coaster all day long. And when you flood with serotonin and dopamine, that dopamine also can get converted to adrenaline or
Yeah.
norepinephrine or a catecholamine. There's three words for the same thing, but that dopamine can get converted to adrenaline. And dopamine is very important for focus, but if we're overstimulating it up with sugar and then it comes back down as blood sugar drops, so then
Right.
you're on this roller coaster of up and down energy and focus. And then when you're in this down part, you feel terrible. And then you reach for the thing that once you went back up, and then you're on this cycle and you
Right.
want to get off it. You want to find things that bring blood sugar and nutrition up, and then it comes down slow. Then you eat, and you're in this snaking
Yeah.
pattern throughout the day versus this roller coaster pattern of blood sugar and nutrition.
Yeah, and I think that really it connects like the body to so many different areas as well, from the endocrine system, talking about all the glands that produce hormones. So it's not just isolated to one thing. It expands out to multiple things throughout your body. And the interesting thing is and everybody is kind of knows this, is when we start looking at the stats that children are starting to get, type 2 diabetes at a younger age. Even some of the stuff being an onset to what some people call diabetes number 3, right, which is
In the brain.
yeah, in the brain. And so all of this stuff is interconnected. This isn't like an isolated situation. And I think that's important for people to understand. This blood sugar regulation, it's a behavioral issue, right? It's like if you say, well, where's the root cause? Well, the root cause is the decisions that we make. Right? The
Mm-hmm.
decision, we're oftentimes the biggest antigen in our own life, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
what's the problem? How did the problem happen? It's like, well, it's the decisions that I made. And I think a lot of people for the longest time in traditional medicine thought, well, these were just like the genetics that I have. I have no choice. If I'm going to get sick, I'm going to get sick. If I'm going to get diabetes, I'm going to get diabetes. And, there's some truth to that. Like we were talking about yesterday, that if you have a genetic issue that happens at birth, it is what it is. But then there's these epigenetic factors that are causing our bodies to go haywire. ADHD is one thing out of many, right? That can happen through blood sugar dysregulation. I think that's important for people to know. And then younger and younger, we're seeing these chronic symptoms happening in kids that we wouldn't have talked about that 15 years ago. It
Yeah.
wouldn't
And
have been
so
that
a lot of,
beneficial.
yeah, when you start to overconsume processed sugar and stimulate cortisol and you overstimulate insulin during pregnancy, you activate epigenetic triggers that make your kiddos more prone to obesity
Hmm.
and mood issues. So then when they're born and they're exposed to the same foods, these genes are more active than, let's say, you had a healthier pregnancy with healthier food. And so epigenetics are real. And if you look at the data on the Pottinger cat studies, this is where they took healthy cats
Great
and
study.
they fed them more processed food, and they followed the litters of the different cats and the cat's health for 2 and 3 generations. They found by the third generations of the cats eating more processed junky food, they lost the ability to reproduce,
Yeah.
right? And so these genetic issues really have been epigenetic issues that have been activated generations ahead of time. And so that's important, right? So like, you see in the Bible, like the sins of the parents are passed on to the kids. Well,
Yeah.
nutritionally, you can kind of see that play out when the Pottinger cat study, right? You can see that play out. So if you're a parent, it's important that when you eat, you're not just thinking about you, you're thinking about the generation that comes after you. I think it's
Absolutely.
important. And then also, I try to get people's thinking about nutrition a little bit more holistically. Most people think about like food coming in, it's calories, I'm taking it, I'm putting it into a furnace, I'm
Mhm.
burning it up. I challenge that way of thinking. Or putting like
Absolutely.
fuel in the car, I'm going to burn it up, right? I'm just going to the cheapest gas station. Oh, that's the cheapest price. I'm going there, right? Well, think about it like this: if I put gas in the gas tank, right? The car just burns that gas. The car's not re-metabolizing or remaking the
Right.
bumper or the suspension or remaking the engine every year with the fuel in the car. But your body's doing that. It's using it to make its hormones. It's remaking the liver. It's remaking its endocrine system. It's remaking the neurological tissue
Hmm.
with that raw material. So if you're
Absolutely.
putting junky fuel in that tank, the ability for those cells to turn over and become healthier are going to be impacted. So yes, the car does not turn over like that, but
Yeah.
we do. And so it's really important. Think about the raw material and think about how you want your cells to look better and function better over time and not become depleted as you age.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really is like an onion in that sense that, like, you sort of have a first wave round of things that you're doing, trying to change your cellular expression, cellular function. And cells replicate, right? So we change our cells out every single year. Some of them faster, some of them slower, but generally speaking,
Hmm.
we change these out. So it's important for people to understand that, especially whenever your child is young and they're learning uh, just behaviors, right? How should I eat? How should I take care of my body? How should I do these different things? And our generation, at least with me, with my parents, it was kind of like, I mean, it's like everybody all for themselves, right? It's like, you eat whatever's in front of you. You go out and ride your bike wherever, and you're never worrying about anything. But the problem with that is our generation now just kind of, we are the standard American diet, right? We're the standard American, like everything, whatever we want, whatever we want to do, we do. And the
Yep.
results of that are not like, they're not innate, right? It affects you. You start eating a certain way for a long period of your life, it's going to affect you. You start drinking water that's affected with certain things, or contaminated, it's going to affect you. All of these little things are going to affect you, and we haven't even gotten into like heavy metals. We haven't gotten into all these other things in our discussion. But I think right out of the gates, it's been a great conversation because we're talking about one of the first things that we can do, which is the intake that we have inside of our mouth, right? So the water and the food, that goes a long way. Um, and just mindfulness, starting to
Hmm.
be mindful about, getting your kids, getting yourself to get outside, do some grounding, um, re-engage back with reality, right? And starting to steward your bodies, take responsibility for them, take responsibility for your children, and start doing these things. It goes a long, long way faster than what I think most people think is possible.
I agree. Now, when people love to reach for diagnoses, and well, I need a
Yeah.
diagnosis, but it's like a diagnosis is only helpful to the means of which you use that to get to the root cause. The problem
Mhm.
with I have an ADHD or ADD diagnosis, what's the tool the conventional medicine is going to use to address that issue? It's usually going to
Absolutely.
be some kind of a stimulant or some kind of an SSRI medication. None of
Mhm.
it's going to address the underlying issue. Younger kids, there may be some developmental impact overstimulating a brain for 10, 20 years. And so I wouldn't overly rely on that. And so what can we do to actually get to the root cause? So we talked about different nutrients, talked about magnesium and theanine and ways to knock down glutamate. We talked about ways to help get the insulin resistance in check by focusing on good proteins and fats. And if we're going to do carbs, try to do more whole food based carbs based on how active your kids are. If your kids are sitting around all day, they probably don't need a bunch of starch. If
Mm-hmm.
they're going to be in a classroom, maybe you give them a handful of blueberries instead, right? We talked about a lot of these blood sugar issues. Start the inflammation in the brain. Start the type 3 diabetes, the plaquing that's going to start contributing to Alzheimer's and dementia. I mean, newsflash: Alzheimer's and dementia starts in your 20s, maybe
Yeah, it's
even
pretty
your
wild.
teens, and then
Pretty wild.
takes 30, 40, 50, 60 years to manifest. And so get on top of these things. Don't just think that they happen in your 60s and 70s. They start now. I
Yeah,
would say we can look at different lab testing. We can run organic acid testing to see where methylation's at.
absolutely.
Methylation can be very important. Looking at folate, looking at B6, these are B12. These are important nutrients that help methylate and activate a lot of your neurotransmitters. We can look at getting more building blocks to make dopamine and adrenaline in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
Most kids tend to be low protein. They tend to reach for carbs. And so they don't have enough good amino acids in there. So obviously get it from food, but we may also want to supplement it too. These are good kind of first line approaches.
Mm-hmm.
Many kids have been overprescribed antibiotics and they have maybe a lot of dysbiosis, a lot of fungal overgrowth or candida. And these things could be impacting the microbiome. They could also be impacting nutrient absorption and creating lots of cravings. And 80% of your immune system's in the gut. And so if we have a lot of dysbiotic bacteria or candida, these can be impacts. So you may want to look at dealing with and interacting with the gut, doing gut function tests, looking
Mm-hmm.
at methylation, looking at organic acid to see what could be happening under that hood.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the tests that are out there now, they're phenomenal. They give us a lot of insights in terms of nutrient deficiencies, how your body's operating, whether or not your gut is susceptible or infected. Like you were saying with candida or H. pylori or all the different things, parasites. We can take a good snapshot and picture of these things, and to support these things, to drive a good outcome faster than if you didn't have those. There's some assumptions that you can make, and you can do some things based off of assumptions. But I think testing is the best way to go, because you can just see what's going on. You know where these pieces are at. And, you have a good starting point for their specific biochemistry needs, because we're all different. At the end of the day, we're all different biochemistry wise, and we all have different epigenetic factors. A person living in New Mexico is completely different than a person living in, New York. You're likely to see,
Yeah.
for example, more mold in New York than you are in New Mexico. So there's just variances in how we approach hitting the ball, I guess.
Exactly. And then we kind of focused on some of the, our youngsters and things in this podcast, but a lot of these principles can be applied to adults as well.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
whether you're male or female, if you have hormonal issues, whether it's low progesterone, low estrogen, low testosterone, these hormones have a major impact on your neurotransmitters as well.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of women, we see very low progesterone because they're overly stressed and they're pinch hitting that progesterone to go downstream and make more cortisol. So low progesterone could be a thing. Progesterone opens those GABA chloride channels. Also, things like estrogen. Estrogen is a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. So it's like a natural SSRI. So if your hormones are a bit low, that can impact how you hold on to your neurotransmitters between the synapses. That could be an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, testosterone has quite a bit of input on that frontal cortex, which plays a big role with focus and motivation and decision making. So low testosterone could be an issue. And guys, you'll also see higher estrogen because they're aromatizing a lot of their testosterone to estrogen. Aromatization is an enzyme that converts testosterone to estrogen due to typically inflammation and insulin resistance due to primarily too many junky foods and processed carbs.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
then women these days, if they have lots of insulin problems, they can actually have higher levels of testosterone, which can cause more hormonal issues, can cause prolactin problems and cause cycle aberrations. And it's the number one cause of infertility, testosterone due to ovarian cysts. So that's a big factor as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah, and that's where I was at. Like I was, my testosterone was low, my estrogen was trending high, and working on that. The thing is you can switch these things around pretty quickly, epigenetically, and with the support of specific supplementation, diet, rest, movement, all of these different things that we can do. Our body responds. And I think that's the good news out of all of this is if somebody has ADHD, they've got brain fog, they've got or their children do. Um, there's many different things we can do to move the needle on that, and it's successful. Um, so yeah, I think it's a great conversation. It's a thing that needs to get out there more, because I think more and more people are starting to experience this. And like you said, I don't want to get Alzheimer's. I mean, I think about that from time to time. I have a relative of mine that I'm not going to mention who she is, but she's got Alzheimer's. She's going down that path, and it's not fun to watch. And I don't want to get to that point. Epigenetically, we know we can influence these factors. So it's like time to get on it, especially if you're trending towards like 30, 40 years old, get on it, man. Like stop waiting, because you need to start getting your body in a position for the next 40 years
Yep.
where you're going to start feeling this stuff. And the further it goes, the harder it is to correct. And that's
Yep.
the same with children too.
Yep. And one last component is stress hormones mobilize glucose. Think about it, right? If you were encountered like some kind of a lion or a bear, that stress hormone that would stimulate you would mobilize a whole bunch of fuel, aka glucose, so you could run, fight, and flee. And
Yeah.
so we're chronically stressed, but now that glucose just hangs out in our system because we're not
Mhm.
using it. And so this is why exercise or just going for a walk when you're stressed can be a huge thing, because it can just start to clear out all that glucose from the stress hormone. So if you are
Mhm.
noticing you're getting more stressed, go for that walk, do some zone 2 cardio, do a
Yeah.
little bit of lifting, just do some gentle movement to say, okay, I'm going to clear out some of that glucose. So now that stress hormone is not going to be as overly stimulating me as well. And so people think of like, oh, I'm getting glucose from eating too much carbs, but no, you can get it from stress. And that's why doing some movement can really help rebalance you.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you mentioned movement. I think a lot of people that I think are around our age, we were brought up sort of thinking, what it means to exercise is maxing out on the bench press, or going on a 6 mile run or something like that. And that's still even inside of when I was in my 30s, I still thought that was the way to do it, and that's just not the case. We're talking about movement to help out your
Mhm.
lymphatic system, to get your body recognizing that you're still a living human being that needs energy production in your extremities and throughout your entire body.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and 80s and 90s moms had it right. They're like, oh, your kids are hyperactive. Guys, go outside, go run
Yeah,
around, go in
go
the
run around.
backyard, get an hour or two, and then you come back in, they're all chilled out and relaxed, and, uh, and everything's been burnt off, right? We intuitively knew that. But
Yeah.
today it's like, oh, just, yeah, okay, you're hyper. Here, have an iPad. Here, go, let's put on Netflix for you. Let's stimulate more dopamine,
Which is
right?
like
Let's cause
worse.
more stimulation, right?
Yeah.
So we got to go back to the generation. Hey, guys, go outside, go run around, right? We got to go
Yeah.
into that.
And to
I think
not
it's a
feel
better way.
guilty about saying that. Like, not to feel
Right.
guilty about saying that. Like, your kids are going to be like, let me play on the iPad, right? Be like, no, right? It's don't feel guilty about it. You're doing it for their best benefit. And, I think rocking it that way goes a long way, more than what people realize.
Yeah, I walk around our neighborhood these days and we just don't see as many kids outside. A lot of
No.
parks are empty. And I think that's a big deal. I think parents, it's really easy and comforting to put your kid in front of an iPad that you can just see the kid right there. You know they're safe, and that it's it. And you think, okay, you're doing a good job as a parent.
Yeah.
But we got to get kids moving again a little bit. I think parents intuitively know that. Anyone from our generation, right, can
Mhm.
remember that. I think can really empathize with that.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think it's a great
Awesome.
conversation.
All right, excellent. Well, guys, hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you did, please let us know in the comments. Again, Rob's website is heritagehealth.life, link down below. Again, I'm Dr. J, justinhealth.com as well. Both do functional medicine support consultations worldwide. Need that? Feel free and let us know. Excellent time chatting today, Rob. Good chatting with you, man.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, brother.
Take care. Bye now.
Peace.